Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another week installment of Autodesk Virtual Academy as presented by KETIV Technologies. We got another fan favorite topic for you guys this week. We're going to be talking about some iLogic here today on this lovely September morning, 9/9/2021. So thanks for being here, everybody. Cameron, you're on the line with us, Cam. How you doing?
Good. I'm good, Adam.
Nice. Cam, one of the friendliest, most helpful application engineers on the team, been very busy lately, so he's been generous enough to lend us some of his time to teach us, the audience, about some external rules and customizing snippets in iLogic, which isn't just helpful for simplifying your iLogic, but for simplifying and streamlining your guys' industrial workflows as a whole. So yeah, thanks for being on here, Cameron. How you doing today?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Nice. Right on. And so yeah, this is iLogic and automation have been a particularly interesting topic for a lot of people, I think. And so I hope you guys are appreciating the kind of frequency of topics that we have coming up over here. But as always, it's a Zoom webinar. Let's get into it, right? Zoom webinar. There's going to be a few stuff on screen, right? So you have a few buttons like the chat window and the Q&A section if you want to ask us any questions. Q&A lets us just track questions a bit more efficiently. In chat, we might be sending links through there, so be on the lookout for that stuff. As always, if there's any issues with video quality or audio, just let us know. Happy to take a moment and fix any of that. And if you guys have any feedback, any curiosities, more questions, topic suggestions for the future, there will be a survey going out at the end of this presentation as well, via email, which we do peruse and cry over or rejoice over, depending on how friendly you guys are, as well as take additional topics for the future. With that said, Cameron, I'll get out of your way, man. I'll let the subject matter expert get on his way over here, man.
All right.
Let's see what you got, man.
Okay. Thanks, Adam. All right. Welcome, everyone. Like Adam said, today we're going to be talking more iLogic and talking about how to manage our external rules and custom snippets. So first, I'll introduce myself, and then we'll talk a bit about some of the tools that we can use to save you your development time. And then I'll mention another video that is tangentially related to the topics we're going to be talking about today. And then we'll jump right into it, switch over to Inventor and go through the demonstration. And then at the end, we'll go have some time for some questions and answers. So like Adam said, if you've got questions, you don't have to save them for the end. You can just, throughout the session today, just type them into the Q&A, and we'll try to get them to them as best as we can at the end. So I'm on KETIV's automation team, where I develop add-in applications for Inventor primarily. My teammates and I write programs that automate the product design process. And my current project that I'm working on is an Inventor add-in that automatically generates a modular assembly. It configures custom bills of materials and generates proposal documentation. So that's the kind of stuff that we do. So if your company needs to speed up the design process, whether in Inventor or Vault, AutoCAD, etc., please reach out to us here at KETIV and find the best way to meet that need. I personally have been using Inventor for 15 years and have been writing iLogic code since the capability was first added to Inventor about 10 years ago. Now, over the years, I've written many iLogic rules, and I've found that there are many blocks of code that I find myself writing over and over again. And there are even entire rules that I end up writing over and over again. Now, iLogic rules live inside the document that they are written in, but some rules provide functionality that's useful in any document. And you might find yourself copying the rule and pasting it into another document so it can be used there. But today, we are going to check out some tools that will help you to reuse your code. Custom snippets let you save blocks of code that you use often, so you don't need to write them each time. External rules make it possible to extend the functionality of an iLogic rule so that you can use it from any document instead of just the document that it's created in. And then finally, we're going to show you how to take advantage of custom snippets to make it easier to call on your external rules. So when we talk about external rules today, I'll be using a bit of code from the last AVA session that I did at the end of June. If you missed that session, don't worry, you don't need to have seen it first for what we're talking about today. But if you want more information about ways to reuse code, you can go ahead and check out that video on our YouTube channel, KETIV Technologies. And the title of the video is Advanced iLogic, Functions, Subroutines, and External Rules. So it's a good supplemental to what we're talking about today. All right, so let's hop over to Inventor and talk some iLogic. Now we'll switch over to Inventor. All right, so for Inventor, I'm just going to open up our iLogic editor here. I'll just quickly add a rule here just to get into our iLogic editor so we can take a look at some things. So if you've done any work in iLogic at all, then you're familiar with these snippets right here, which are essentially just little bits of code that are pre-written for you so that you can just quickly write your code by, selecting something, and you double click it and it drops wherever your cursor is. It's going to drop in a little bit of code. And so all of these snippets here are the built-in ones that come with Inventor that Autodesk has already written up for us and provided them for our use. They're very handy. I use them all the time. But there are times, like I said, where you may find yourself writing the same bit of code over and over again, and it would be nice to be able to just use it like you do these built-in snippets. And so Inventor has that functionality so that we can do that. And it's over here. If you've never noticed, there's that system tab up here, which is what we're seeing here with all the built-in snippets. But if we switch over to this custom tab, then allows us the ability to save our own snippets. So we can use them just like the built-in ones, but it's our own custom code. So in fact, if there's this folder here called My Snippets, and if you expand that, underneath that there's already some snippets that are provided for us. I guess they're quote unquote custom snippets, even though they're kind of built in already. But these ones actually provide quite a bit of additional functionality that's useful. And you can see there's quite a bit of code involved. If we hover over this, the little tooltip shows us a quick description of what the snippet is, what it does, and it gives us a preview of some of the code. So if I just insert one of these, like let's say, I don't know, HTML report templates, so there's quite a bit of code that writes for you. Yeah, so there's some useful stuff here. So, but not only are these built-in snippets here for us, but it also provides us the functionality to save and manage our own library of custom snippets. So we're going to be talking about that today. I'm going to show you how to create snippets, how to manage them, where they get stored, how all that works. And the idea is that when you save a custom snippet, it's actually saving that little bit of code into an XML file that's stored on disk somewhere, and Inventor knows where to look for it. And you can see, so these built-in ones, these are being stored in XML somewhere. If you want to see where they're being stored, you just go up to this little button here, this custom snippets properties. If we click on that, this is going to show us the file location where it's actually reading these snippets. So under program, it gets installed with Inventor under program files, your Inventor version, and then this file here, iLogic user snippets.xml, has all of these snippets are in that one file. So what we're going to be doing when we create custom snippets is you can add to this library, but I like to just start my own, just kind of keep it separate from what Inventor's doing when it installs. Because if you ever have to reinstall or upgrade to a new version or something, you want to keep your custom snippets separate from the ones that are built into Inventor. And so I create my own custom snippets file, library file, XML that gets stored. So the first thing you want to consider when you're creating any new snippets is you want to decide where you're going to store them, where that XML file is going to be saved. And it's got to be in a place, obviously, that you have right access to. And you also want to consider if you've got other people on your team that are also developing in iLogic, then chances are those snippets will be useful for them as well. And so you want to consider, okay, saving it in a place where it's accessible to other members of your team. So that might be a network folder, or if you're using Vault, you definitely would want to place those in the Vault so that other members of your team can get access to those. So like I said, it gets stored in an XML file. You could have multiple XML files that have different snippets in them. And you can just, tell Inventor which custom snippets file to show here. So if you just hit this open, pulls up a window, you can browse to wherever your snippets XML is going to be. Like I said, if you have multiple, then you can just, switch between them by opening different ones, or you can even merge them all into one list here. I have never really found a need to keep multiple snippet XMLs. I tend to just have one that I manage that has all of my custom snippets in it. And I find it's just easier to manage that way, but that is an option that's available to you if you want to have multiple snippet XML library files. So let's go ahead and make one. Now, usually, so when you create a custom snippets file and you load it up, it's going to show you what's in that snippets file. If you haven't, I like to actually just bring these ones along with me. So like I said, I just manage one custom snippets file. I don't like to have multiples, but I also like to have access to these ones that are built in case I need them. And so I actually just like to bring those over and save these into my new custom snippets file. So the way I'll do that is to just start out here. I'm just going to use this save as command. And that's going to take the current snippets file that's loaded, and I'm going to save it out to a new location. So here, I'm just going to go browse to my folder. Let's go into my AVA. Let's do today's session here. And I'll just put it right here, and I'll give it a prefix. This is going to be my AVA iLogic user snippet. You can call that whatever you want. We'll go ahead and save that there. And then that's what gets loaded out. As soon as you do that save as, that's what gets loaded here. You can see if you click on your little properties button again, it can show, okay, now this is the folder that I just chose, my AVA folder, my AVA iLogic user snippets.xml. So that's what we're using right now. And it's got all these built-in ones brought over to it. So let's go ahead and take a look at that folder real quick. So if I open that up in Windows Explorer here, I've browsed to my documents, AVA, customizing iLogic today's session here. And then there's that folder or that file that I just created, AVA iLogic user snippets. Now, if I open this up like a notepad or something, or an XML viewer or something, you can see kind of how that's stored. It's got, these are all the built-in ones that I brought over with it. If I didn't do that, this would have just been, basically an empty XML without any snippets in it yet. But in this case, I've got snippets. So, okay, so now we've got our library file that's set up, ready to go. I can go ahead and start adding my own custom snippets to this. And you can see there's a folder here called My Snippets, and then underneath that are all of the built-in ones. You can create additional folders underneath here by just right-clicking inside here. Inventor calls them categories, but they're like folders. So you can just insert a category, and then you can name it whatever you like. You can name it your company name if you want. That kind of makes it clear that these are snippets that are customized for your company's development environment. Or you could take a lead from the system snippets where they've got them broken out by parameters, properties, components, all that kind of stuff. You can kind of follow that similar organizational structure if you like. I'm just going to go ahead and keep this simple for today and just call it AVA. And then, so now I've got a folder there. I'm ready to go. I can add a snippet. So let's figure out what kind of a good snippet would be good for our first one here. So one that I find that I use a lot, like I said, I work on the automation team, and I develop a lot of automated assembly, building assemblies and configuring assemblies. And a part of that is something I do very often is I need to control the BOM structure of components in an assembly to set the BOM structure to reference or to phantom or something like that. And so I found myself writing that little bit of code over and over and over again. And it's not a lot of code, but especially when I was just starting out with iLogic and learning how to do this stuff, I couldn't remember the right magic words to write to set the BOM structure. And so it was helpful to go ahead and create a snippet for it. So that way I could just quickly get access to it. And it's sped things up quite a bit. So I think that's going to be a good example. Let's go ahead and write a little bit of code that's going to set the BOM structure. And so let's say I need to get access to my component here first. Component occurrence, so we'll call it bracket occurrence equals component Inventor component. And then we give it the browser name, say bracket. That gets our occurrence, and then we need to set the BOM structure. And then BOM structure, we set that equal to BOM structure enum. And like I said, I've done this enough that I know what the right words are now, but when I was first starting out, I didn't. And so I'd have to look this up quite often. So it was very useful to have this as a snippet, so I didn't have to look it up all the time. Okay, so we're going to set let's set that to reference instead of default. Okay, reference. All right, so we're going to set that to reference. So that's a little bit of code that we're going to use often. So let's go ahead and save it. We want to save that as a snippet. So the way you do that is you highlight the code that you want to save, and then you right-click on it. And down here, you've got an option to capture snippet. So go ahead and do that. And then that's going to pull up this little edit snippet editor dialog where we can set this up. So first thing we're going to want to do is set a title. Now that's going to be the text that shows up over here in the browser. And so we want to choose something that is succinct, but can't be very long, but it's also needs to be descriptive so people know what it does when they see the title. So in this case, I'm just going to keep it simple and call it BOM structure to reference. And then we can choose what category we want to store it in. It defaults to the top one there, but I want to store that under my folder, KVA. So we choose that. And then this is the tooltip here. You can just write whatever you want in there. You can use the code as a tooltip, and that just like takes whatever your code is down here and puts it up in the tooltip. I don't usually like to do that. That's not very helpful because you can see the code anyway. When you hover over the tooltip, it shows you that tooltip, and then underneath it, a preview of the code. So I like to actually put some useful information here, but we'll come back to that in a second. The first thing that I like to do here is make sure that my code is going to be good for a snippet. And what I mean by that is right now, this is written with the bracket in mind. And so that works for this particular situation that I'm using it in right now for this bracket file. But next time I use this snippet, it might be for a completely different document that has nothing to do with brackets. And so it might be confusing to the user to have that in there. So this is something they're going to have to change every time they use this snippet. They're going to have to give it the name of the occurrence that they're trying to set the BOM structure for. And so we want to make this more generic and also indicate to the developer that when they use the snippet, this is something they're going to have to change every time. And so we can put something in like my component name here, something like that. That way, when the developer inserts this snippet, they can see, okay, that should stand out as something that they need to change every time they use the snippet. And because that's something they need to change every time, I like to be able to just, instead of like highlighting this slowly by, they need to cover this whole thing, highlight this whole thing, and then start typing what they want. I like to be able to just double click to quickly highlight things. But if I use spaces here, it sees those as separate words, and then I can't just quickly select the whole thing. I mean, you can still kind of drag and do stuff, but what I like to do instead of spaces is put underscores here. That way, I can it sees it as all one word. So when I double click, it just highlights the whole thing, that I can just type my actual component name there. So that's just a little quality of life thing that makes these snippets much more convenient to use for your developers. So keep that in mind. Also, let's see, the second line is not anything that really needs to change there, but it's not very generic still. Like I've named this variable bracket occurrence, which again is fine for this particular situation, but it's not going to be fine for other situations. And so we might want to genericize that a little bit so that it's not confusing down the road. So we could just, like I said, make this a little more generic and say maybe comp component occurrence, but then we also got to make sure we rename that here as well. And this is all stuff you could do. So you could just set it up this way from the beginning out here in the editor. But I just wanted to show you that you can do that kind of stuff in here as well. So we've got comp my component name here, and then we're getting the comp and setting its BOM structure to reference. So there we go. Another thing you might want to consider in here is adding comments that explain what different parts of your code are doing. It's not necessary, and I wouldn't go overboard with it because, again, this is something you might use many, many times throughout a piece of code. And so every time you insert the snippet, it's going to insert those comments. So just keep that in mind, but we might want to maybe explain what this is doing here, like get the component occurrence for that one. And then here, maybe, set structure to reference. This one, we could probably leave that one out. That's probably, because it's pretty clear from that line what it's doing there. So we could probably leave that one out just to kind of make our code more compact. And so we're not inserting that extra lines every time we use this. So there we go. That's good for our snippet. Now, last thing we want to do is set up our tooltip. And this is the place you want to explain what the snippet does, any modifications that the developer is going to need to make when they use the snippet. Like, for example, changing the name of the component here. That's something they're going to have to change every time. So we'll want to make note of that in the tooltip. We want to make note of any prerequisites. Like one of the snippets we'll do later is going to require an external rule to exist. So we'll want to make sure we note that. And any other relevant info you want to put up here. So let's go ahead and just write our tooltip here. And we'll just say that we're going to explain what it does. It sets a component occurrences BOM structure reference. And then I want to add some additional lines, but if I hit enter here, like to go to the next line, it's not actually going to do that. It's going to just hit OK like that, and then it actually saves it out. If you accidentally do that, it's fine. You can just right click here and go back into edit, and it'll pull that editor back up. But if you want to go to the next line, you have to hold down Control and then hit enter, and then that'll give you a line return. And then let's see, we need to tell the user that they've got to make some modifications to the snippet each time they use it. So we'll say replace I'm just going to copy and paste that. Paste. And you'll see it starting, it copied the formatting, that green color up to here. That's fine. You'll see that it doesn't actually remember that. Don't have to worry about it. So that's our tooltip. Go ahead and hit OK. So now when we hover over that, you'll see up at the top in bold is the tooltip, and then down below is a preview of the code. In this case, this code is short, so it's just the whole thing of what is actually going to be inserted when you hit the snippet. And then just to show you, I'm going to go back in and edit that. You'll see that green text doesn't get saved. It's just a weird little quirk of the copy and paste there. All right, so there's our snippet. So anytime we want to use that, we just double click and it writes that little bit of code in there for us. And we just have to remember to change the name of our component here, and then we're good to go. And then if we wanted to, write one that was similar for setting it back to default, then we could just, modify this, highlight that, capture the snippet, copy and paste the tooltip and change what we need. Once you get started, it's super easy to create custom snippets. So one important thing, after you do that, remember to save. You have to actually hit the save button to save the changes you've made to your custom snippets library XML file. If you cancel out or close out of this editor without saving, it's not going to save any custom snippets you've edited or added new. So you've got to make sure you hit that save, and then it actually will work here. So now if I cancel out here, I actually don't want to run this rule. It wouldn't even work in the context of a part file anyway. It's more of an assembly thing there. But if we go back into the editor, then we'll see and go over our custom snippets. There's our AVA folder, and there's our custom snippet there. Okay. All right. So, yeah.
Sorry. Okay, we got a question over here too. And so just to clarify, on the you changed that string for my component name here to make it kind of generalized for future components, right?
Yeah.
Do you need to do the same with comp OCC as well, the variable name at the beginning?
No, you don't have to. That's just a variable name that would have worked just fine if I had left it as bracket OCC.
Yep.
but I wanted to make it more generic because, again, like I said, the situations you're going to use this in down the road will probably have nothing to do with the bracket. And so that wording will just end up being confusing, even though it would actually work and the code would run just fine. It's going to be confusing to the reader, anyone who's reading that code later down the road. So that's the reason I made it more generic.
That makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah, because the variable name doesn't refer to a specific instance in the assembly. That's only the string in that actual function there. So,
right.
Thanks. Okay.
Yep.
Hope that answers your question, Scott. Let me know.
Okay, so let's talk about external rules for a minute. We're going to come back to do some more custom snippets later after we talk about external rules, because we're going to talk about how we can use the two together. So, so external rules, like I said, are rules that live outside of any Inventor document. So normally when you create an iLogic rule, it's going to be saved in the actual document that you've written the rule in. So like these two here, I've got a size rule and a description rule. They live inside of this bracket document. If I open up another document, I'm not going to have access to those. And so if I've got a rule that is useful, that can be useful in more than one place, then I will want to save that rule as an external rule. That gives me the option of being able to see that rule from any other document. So the way it works is when you create an external rule, it's actually saving it as a separate file on disk somewhere. And so when you build up a library of external rules, you've just got a bunch of little files that represent each of those rules, that have the text of those rules in them. And the first thing we want to do when we're setting up external rules is we have to tell Inventor where to look so it knows where to find those external rules. Because if we just go on my iLogic browser here and switch right over here to external rules, there's nothing there because I haven't told Inventor where it can find any external rules. So we have to tell it to do that. So this is there we go. All right. So the way we do that is we go to the Tools tab in Inventor. We go to this Options panel, and there's a drop down here on the label. If you click on that, and you'll see there's this iLogic configuration button there. We want to hit that. And this is just a setup thing you'll want to do just one time only. Just set up Inventor, unless you reinstall or update to another version. You don't have to do this again. But we want to go to this advanced iLogic configuration, and this top section here is telling us what folders Inventor should look in to find external rules. And it can be more than one folder. So when you add a folder here, let's go ahead and add one. So I just hit the plus button and then go browse. Let's see, I actually want to go documents, ABA, customizing. So I've already got a folder that I've set up called external rules. If I select on that, and that's going to add that to the list of external rule directories. So now that I've added that folder called external rules, what's going to show up over here when I hit OK is there's going to be a folder there called external rules. And any external rule files that are stored in there are going to be listed underneath that folder. Now, if you want more than one folder, you can just add additional folders here. I tend to kind of keep them all kind of close together. So one folder that has all my external rules in it, but there'll be subfolders underneath that actually help me to organize all of my external rules. And I definitely encourage you to do that if you're organizing your rules by type, whether it's working with part documents or assembly documents or drawing, rules for drawings, or you could do something more generic like for just automating models versus drawings, or the sky's the limit. You can organize it however you like, but it's definitely nice to have multiple folders that you can, and they'll just show up as multiple folders listed over here on the browser. Okay, in this case today, we just need the one, so I'll just use that one external rules folder. The next thing we want to look at in here is this default extension for external rule files. So when you store an external rule file, it can be either an iLogic VB file, a text file, or a VB file. Those are the three different types that Inventor will recognize as external rules. And you can save any and all types. You can mix and match. Inventor doesn't really care. Just the default here is when you're creating a new external rule, which we'll do in a minute, if you don't specify the file extension when you create it, it's just going to use what you've got set up here as the default. So that's all that's doing here. But you can certainly save it as any type at any time. I like to use TXT just because it's you can open it up in Notepad and just quickly see the contents of an external rule if you need to. I've never really had a need for either of these other types. There may be advantages to them or disadvantages. I've never really needed anything other than TXT for my external rules. So That's typically what I use, but that's completely up to you. So go ahead and hit OK. So that's all we need to set up for external rules today. So now we've added this external rules folder. And I've actually already got an external rule in there. So let me open up that folder so you can see. If I go into external rules, I've already got one that's in here that we'll talk about in a minute. So that shows up as a list under external rules right here. And we'll talk about that one. We'll come back to that one in a minute. But first, I want to talk about how to create new rules and add rules. So if you right click under, like here, you can create a new external rule. You can also just right click here and add external rules, which is like if there's an existing file that you want to add, you can browse to it and it'll add it to the list. And I think it actually copies it over into the folder. But in this case, we're gonna right click. We're gonna say create a new external rule, and that's gonna open up. Well, first it's gonna ask us what we want to call it, the file name. So we want to make sure we're in the right folder here, which we are. And then this one we'll just call it Hello World. And if I don't, I can say .txt or .vb, and it'll just make whatever I want. If I don't specify, then it's going to use the default that I chose in the options. So for my case, that'll be text file. Go ahead and hit save.
I had another question here, Cam. And so when you were setting the directories for the external rules and stuff, are you setting just like the top level folder, or can you have like nested folders under the explicit directories there? And will it still pick up those rules and subfolders?
That's a good question. I don't know if, well, let's find out. Let's go back in here. And let's remove that one, and instead we'll add just the higher level folder above that, and we'll see.
Yeah, if it picks up everything beneath it.
Yeah, let's try that. Yeah, it sure does.
Right on.
So there you go. That's another option to help you organize stuff. Great question. All right, I'm going to switch that back just to simplify things here. Remove that. Go back to one folder. Okay, there we go. All right, so you can see it's an empty rule for now. We haven't added anything to it, but it's there because when we actually hit save, it actually saved the TXT file. So if I go over to my Windows Explorer, you'll see now there's a Hello World text document in there. Nothing in it yet, but so let's go ahead and open up that. And let's add some stuff to it. We'll just do something real simple here. We'll say this doc name string. Get the display name. And then this doc name. And then we'll concatenate that with just some text here. And then we'll go back to our built-in snippets and go to our message box and show, and we'll take our message text and we'll have it display the message text instead of just the word message. And then this will be our title. All right, so there's our external rule. So we'll go ahead and save that and run. We'll see how that does. Okay, so this file is called custom bracket, and it says hello. So now this is an external rule. So if I actually open up, let's start a new part document and go over to our iLogic tab, go to our external rules. So there we go. So we created a rule that's now available from any Inventor document. And if we just run it straight from here, because I've set it up to work with, to just read the document name at the time it runs, and it's going to say, okay, this is part 2. It says hello. So there we go. There's our first external rule. Now, let's do something a little more complicated. An external rule that we need to send information to and get information back from. And this ties into that other AVA session that I mentioned at the beginning today, the session that I did back in June, where we talked about functions, subroutines, and external rules. And we talked briefly about how to pass information data from one rule into another rule, from a rule in this document into an external rule, and how to get information back. So we're going to be doing that sort of thing today. In fact, we're going to be using the rule that we created in that session. So this may look familiar if you saw that session. If not, don't worry about it. I'll just give you a quick summary of what's happening here. The idea is we want to be able to take a decimal value, like 1.79, and we want to round it to the nearest fraction of an inch, and then return that rounded value, but not as a decimal, but as a mixed fraction string. So for example, 1.79 is going to get rounded to, let's say, the nearest quarter inch. That'll be 1.75. And then we convert that into an actual fraction, which is 1. And so instead of sending 1.75 back, it'll actually send 1 3/4, or 1 space 3/4. Right? So that's what this rule here is doing. It's doing all that conversion and rounding and all of that stuff. And then we pass the value back as a mixed fraction. And the way that we are passing values, so the idea is here, like in this bracket document, I've got some parameters already set up, like a thickness and a length in the Z direction, a length in the X direction that I want to be able to do this conversion on and get a string value back. So I could, inside of my iLogic rule, where I'm, instead of, the decimal value that I'm going to round, I could just put in a parameter for length Z or length X or thickness, and then have it use that. And that would work fine for this particular document. But again, we want this functionality to be useful. This is useful in any type of Inventor document. So we want to make this as an external rule. And so when we are running it in another part file or something, there's not necessarily, there's no guarantee that there's going to be a thickness parameter or a length X parameter. So we can't just put that parameter name inside this external rule, because when it runs in another document in the future, if that parameter doesn't exist, it's going to fail, because it's going to try and look for it and not find it. So we have to think a little bit differently when we're running external rules. We have to think, okay, when this rule runs in a different context from another document, is it going to work correctly? What kind of information do we need to have? So in this case, the decimal value is something we're going to need. The round increment is something we're going to need. And so we have to send that value from another rule to this. And the way we're going to do that is with this thing called a shared variable, which is just an iLogic snippet you can find in the built-in snippets. You go over to System and go down to Variables. There's different options here, and we're looking at this shared variable here. So when we use that command, that shared variable, it's when we use it on one side, it's going to create the shared variable and store a value into it. And that just stores it in the Inventor environment in memory, so that when we run another rule later, we can just say, okay, check for a shared variable called decimal value. And if it exists, get the value from it and store it here into this local decimal value that we're going to use down here and do some math with. So that's what we're doing here. We're just getting access to that shared variable. And that has to exist, but we'll take care of that in our iLogic rule that exists inside this bracket part. I'll show you that later. But just this is how it's going to work. When we write this external rule, we're going to assume that that shared variable exists, and we're going to get its value. Now, if you wanted to be more robust and not have errors being thrown up, if that shared variable hasn't been created properly, you could add in some additional code here for error checking, just to check, like this right here, the shared variable exists. You could do a check first, like an if statement says, okay, if shared variable exists, then go ahead and do all this stuff. If it doesn't exist, then maybe display a message box to the user that says, hey, I was looking for this variable, couldn't find it, please fix that. So, but we're going to keep it simple today. We're just going to assume that shared variable exists. We're going to grab its value. And another shared variable for the round increment, we're going to grab its value. We're going to do some math and some string manipulation to get our mixed fraction. And now we need to be able to send the mixed fraction back to whatever rule or document is going to be running this external rule. And so, again, we're going to take advantage of shared variables. So we're going to just, in this case, you'll see that the order is reversed. Instead of up here, we're actually finding the shared variable with that name and getting its value and storing it locally. Down here, we've reversed. And so now we're saying shared variable. In this case, what we're doing is we're actually creating the shared variable named mixed fraction and storing the value that we've calculated up here into that shared variable. so that we can then access it from another rule, which I think will make sense as we go on. I'll show you how that works, how all that gets set up. So, but the idea is here to set this rule up so that we can run this as an external rule from any document that we want to. Okay, so this rule is already all set up. All we need to do is now we want to call it from this particular document, this bracket document. So I've already got a description rule that I've started to set up here, and we're going to expand on that and actually make it work. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And what we want to do here is I want to actually take the length Z, length X, and the thickness and convert those to mixed fractions so I can put them in a description string for the iProperty description. So I'm going to close out of this for now. I'm going to go into iProperties just so you can see what I'm talking about. And this description property right now is empty. We're going to write a string that actually tells us, the width by the length by the thickness, and all using fractional values. So that's the purpose of this description rule right here. And so we want to get the thickness, we want to round it, the length Z and the length X, round those, and we're going to concatenate those into a description string here. So we want to use our external rule that does this whole rounding and conversion to a mixed fraction for us. So let's go ahead and write that. And what that's going to look like is first, we need to create those shared variables that we have to pass information to. So we're going to create shared variables. And the way that works is we just use our built-in snippet over here for shared variable. And then we have to tell it what the name of the shared variable that we're trying to create. And this has to match exactly what the external rule is expecting to find. So if we switch back over that just to check real quick. Oh, that's the wrong one. Decimal inches. So here's what we want. We want decimal value, and we also want to create one called round increment. And those names have to match exactly because this is what it's going to look for. And if it doesn't find it, it's going to fail. So let's go back to our description rule. And then this is going to be decimal value. And then we have to set what the value of that shared variable is going to be. So in this case, we're looking for the thickness. So I'm going to go grab the value from the actual thickness parameter and drop that in there. And then we're going to write another shared variable. And this one's going to be for the round increment. And then this one, if I had a parameter, I would use it. In this case, I don't need one. So I'm just going to type in a decimal value there. Okay, so now we've created those two shared variables. So we're ready to run the external rule. So we're going to go over here again in our built-in snippets, and we're going to go to run other. That's where you'll find the code to run other iLogic rules. And here's one here for run external rule. So we'll double click that. And then we've got to put in the name of that external rule, and it's got to match exactly. So decimal inches to fraction. So that's going to run that external rule. And because we've already created the shared variables, it should run just fine. But then when that rule is finished running, it's going to create a shared variable that stores the value of our mixed fraction. So we need to get that value back and use it so we can use it in here. In fact, what we want, where we want to use that is right here in this thickness rounded variable. So what I want to do, pick those out, and we want this to be the shared variable that is called mixed fraction, right? And that name's got to match again. So if you're not sure what it is, you got to go check. Look in our external rule and down to the bottom here. Okay, it's creating a variable called mixed fraction. And just copy that, bring it over here into your description rule, and paste that there. So now we're grabbing the value of that mixed fraction, we're storing it in our thickness rounded. So later down here, we can put that into our description. Okay, so that'll work for the first one. We want to do the same thing for the length X and the length Z, but I don't want to write all that over again. And I could just copy and paste it. That would be a quick way to do it. But what I want to do is I want to be able to use that external rule in many, many other documents. And rather than having to set all this stuff up every time, I just want to create a snippet for it. So I can just, it's super easy to use. because I don't want to have to, every time I want to call this external rule, I don't have to go, okay, what did I call that variable? I got to open it up, go, okay, I need decimal, round increment, mixed fraction, do that every single time. If I just store this as a snippet now, then I don't have to do any of that crap ever again. I just insert my snippet, change a couple things, and I'm good to go. Okay. So I'm just going to add some comments here so we know what's going on. Okay. All right. So I'm going to capture this as a snippet. So I don't want that comment because that's specific to what I'm doing here. But all of this stuff should go into my snippet. So grab all that and right click, capture snippet. I'm going to switch over to my custom here so I can see what I'm working with. And then my title here, again, you want it to be succinct but descriptive. So we'll say decimal into fraction. I want to store that in my AVA folder. We'll come back to the tooltip in a second. Let's go down to our code, make sure it's going to work. It's generic enough. And so let's see. That stuff we definitely want to change. That's specific to the external rule we're trying to run. Thickness, though, that's not something that's going to exist in other documents, so we don't want to have that in there. That'll just be confusing. In the other example, we had like a string we put in there, like my component name. In this case, I don't want to put a string here. I don't want to imply that that should be a string value, so I don't want to do that. We need to make sure they understand, okay, this needs to be a number. So I'm just going to put something in there, like 1.25. Doesn't really matter. We'll make it clear in the tooltip that this is something that the user needs to, that the developer is going to need to change each time they use this snippet. So I'll just leave those two decimals. That's just fine. The external rule, that doesn't need to change. That's going to be the same every time. We're going to read the shared variable. That shared variable name is going to be the same. But this right here, we probably want to genericize this like we were talking about earlier. I mean, it would work just fine with that variable name, but it's going to be confusing to someone down the road if we leave it like that. So let's just give it something else. Mixed fraction will do. And it doesn't really matter that that's the same name there. That's not going to cause a conflict. These shared variables are stored separately. So, okay, so there's our rule. It's a little more generic. Should be good to go. So let's just write up a tooltip really quick here. Like I said, we want to make sure we understand what this, we communicate what this does. Round to decimal, value to fraction. And we want to explain what the user's going to have to change. So I typically do this by just saying, okay, this is the variable and what you need to do with it. And then in this case, we want to tell them, and this is actually going to send a value back. So we want to make that clear so they know what they're going to get, what this thing does. So it's going to return. Okay. And then also this rule has this snippet has a prerequisite. What it's doing is it's running this rule named decimal inches to fraction. And so in order for this to work properly, that external rule has to be available in the external rules. And so just make a note here that this requires decimal inches to fraction. Okay. All right. Here we go. There is our new external rule. Let's go ahead and make sure we save that so we don't forget. And now we're just going to, now we've got it here, we can just go ahead and insert it. You can drop it there, double click. And then we want to make sure we change the things we need to change. So in this case, we're doing length X. So let's grab that guy. And then this value, I'll change that to 16. This is all fine. This right here, though, we're storing it as mixed fraction, but I've already got a variable that I've created to use for that. So I'm just going to go ahead and just copy this down here. we're going to take that mixed fraction shared variable and store it there instead, and I'll get rid of that line. Okay, and then add it here again, and this will be our like Z. And then we'll do the same thing here, copy this. Just use the variable that I've already set up. There we go. So now let's go ahead and save. This is a suppressed role. Let's go ahead and unsuppress that because now it's actually functional. We'll save and run. And now when we go into our iProperties, we'll see there's the description that got built with our fractional mixed fraction values. One thing to consider when using shared variables like this to pass values between rules, and especially with external rules, is there's this option for down under variables to remove a shared variable or even remove all. That's something you might consider, you might need if there's a potential for, you might be running some other rules, maybe further down this rule or later on, that might use the same shared variable names. And if you don't want them to kind of get the streams crossed, then you can go ahead and, as soon as you're done with them here, you can remove them. I don't need to remove them each time here, even though I'm using the same shared variable name multiple times. That's fine. It'll just create it. It'll see that it already exists and it'll just store a new value in it and then just use it. That won't cause any conflicts here. But if there's ever a potential for a conflict to exist, you could consider removing the shared variables. You could even do that inside of the external rule itself inside here. And this is actually what I would do if I was concerned about that, is right here, after we've actually got the value from the shared variables, we don't need those anymore. So I would add some extra lines here that remove those shared variables just in case. And then after this one gets created, we don't want to remove it here because we still need to use it in the other rule. So back in the snippet in here, I would probably add to our custom snippet here. After we grab the shared variable and store it, we don't need it anymore. So I'd add another line here that removes that particular shared variable. And so that way you don't have to do it every single time. It's already stored in the snippet, already in the external rule. So it just works that way automatically each time. So there we go. That was pretty much what I wanted to cover today. We've still got a little bit of time left over for some questions. So let's go ahead and get to that.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Yeah, so I didn't realize you could kind of work together with external rules and snippets like that. That'll save a lot of time, I'm sure. But,
Absolutely.
Yeah, we got a few questions over here. Someone's asking, is there a limit to how many parameters you could send to an external rule? For example, in your decimal inches to fraction rule, could you send the decimal values in precision, 1/8, 16th, and 32nds? I think I'm interpreting your question correctly there, Jerry, but is there a limit to the number of parameters you could pass up to an external rule?
Not that I know of. I mean, there might be, if you max out the memory on your computer, but that's unlikely to happen. So yeah, I for all practical purposes, no, there's no limit.
Right. And then another comment from Eric as well. You can't add an input box and assign the precision at runtime. Yeah, I was curious about that too. Is there any kind of like prompted entry for these kind of iLogic rules you're talking about? So instead of just editing the rules directly, is there just, user prompts that you could put in there?
Like for when you're inserting the snippets.
I guess just like when you're running the rule, perhaps. So yeah, I guess at runtime specifically, right? Can you just access a pull down and then choose I want 1/8 precision or 16th precision?
I mean, there are
inputs
you can do, like you can run in a rule. So that, let's see, where's the message box? Not there, message box. So there's different inputs you can do to prompt the actual user at the time you're running the rule. Mm-hmm. But when you're actually developing the rule and like writing code and inserting snippets, there's not really a way to do that inside of the iLogic development environment.
I got you. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's fine by me. That sounds good. Yeah, and then this is just for Gentry. Are the recordings available? Yes, they usually go up like within the next week or so, so it might take a bit of lead time. But everything that you see here, all the AVAs from previous sessions and beyond, are on our YouTube channel. If you just search KETIV on YouTube, you should find us pretty easy there. I'm gonna close out here. And on the topic of external rules as well, can you say anything about global forms as well? Is that something you might be interested in the future, perhaps? I think that's just the external equivalent to forms, isn't it?
Yeah. Global form is an external equivalent, or is the form equivalent of an external rule, exactly.
Right.
So, like normally when you create an iLogic form, it lives inside this document just like a standard iLogic rule does. But if you want to make a form that's available to any document, like what I've got here, this is kind of an old one. In the olden days, it's not really necessary anymore, but then you can do that. There's a little bit more involved to that. I think we might have an AVA on that maybe last year. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
covered it.
relatively
Yeah.
recent, but not within the last few months or whatever. But
Yeah.
go ahead and search our YouTube channel for AVA videos. I think there's one where we talk about iLogic forms and
I'm
global
pretty sure.
forms. I think is something we covered there as well.
Yeah, and someone else is asking here actually, do you have a session on inserting a part into an assembly and constraining it with iLogic? I think you might be the one to have the answer to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I did one of those
A
last
couple
year, I
months
think.
ago. Yeah,
In
exactly,
2020,
exactly.
there was one I did on. There's actually several of those. We also
Yeah.
have some from Justin Cow. There's several different ways of approaching that. And, Justin Cow did one on configuring an assembly. I did one on generating an assembly like from scratch. It's like you start with an empty assembly, you can write iLogic will replace components, constrain them. So yeah, definitely go check out our catalog of videos. There's one on that very topic.
Yeah, I actually have a playlist, and I've watched that particular video of yours multiple times. Actually, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty good. I'm gonna link you guys the actual playlist over here. So we have, I don't know, like 26 videos and counting on this playlist now. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people love automation, man. It's good stuff, and we have a lot of resources available on our website. So check it out. Check out that playlist in particular. There's a lot of good stuff. Um, I won't say one. Yeah, I won't say one is better than the other per se, but there's a lot of good videos for sure. I like Cameron's a lot, especially if you're looking for really really scalable types of operations and assembly stuff. But they're all pretty good. All right, so I think we're about at the end of time over here. Um, any last words over here, Cameron? We're about at the end of the hour. Appreciate the time as always, man.
Yeah. Glad to be here. I think I covered everything I wanted to. So yeah.
Cool, man. Yeah. Hopefully we'll see you guys again. And I guess just a heads up for everyone else on the call. We're trying out a new schedule. So I think in about 4 weeks time, we'll have another sort of automation type of session. So possibly we'll see you guys again in four weeks or so. So look out for the
Yeah,
survey.
we're still doing AVA every week. It's just the
Yeah,
topics are going to
exactly.
cycle through. So an automation topic like what we talked about today will be, like a 1 week out of the month.
Exactly. So, stay tuned. We got a lot of good stuff here. Thank you again, Cameron, for being on in your busy schedule. Thank you, audience, for being on here with us here today. And we'll be back. We'll be back next week. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.